Welcome back to our conversation with Congressman Joe Kennedy of the 4th Congressional District. Congressman, you want ballots mailed to every voter in the state in advance of the September 1st primary. Secretary of State Galvin has pointed out that independents would have to indicate which party primary they want to enter in advance. He's expressed concern about the cost and procedural hassle of mailing out, paying for, and processing 1 million ballots. And he says, quote, some of these proposals are great for press releases, but not for actually conducting an election, end quote. I think he means you, sir.
Well, I'm not sure he means me. And look, I appreciate the Secretary's expertise, and he's run a number of elections, and so I appreciate that. I also think that, as you know, John, the rough partisan breakdown in this state, about 35% of the state is a registered Democrat, about 15% of the state are registered Republicans, which means 50% of the state would not get a ballot if you just happen to mail a ballot to people that are registered. That's massive levels of voter disenfranchisement. And if we learn any lesson from Wisconsin, where the Republican Party essentially forced an election to take place in the midst of a pandemic, in Milwaukee there was normally 180 polling locations, there was 5. Because they couldn't find the poll workers in order to staff the other ones. Lines were literally down the block and around the corner. We know of at least, I think, over a dozen now, cases where people contracted coronavirus waiting in line for the polls. You're literally saying, choose between your health and your democracy. Massachusetts doesn't have to do that. And I have no doubt that we can put together a measure where even if somebody were to be mailed, if you're an independent, you get mailed a Democratic ballot and a Republican one. And they can mail one back. It ain't going to be that hard.
Now, we're talking about self-addressed stamped envelopes.
Sure.
That people send back. What will that cost the Commonwealth?
So estimates, when we did this press conference about a week ago with a number of members of the delegation and activists, Penn Wilmot from Common Cause said that the election itself, the mailing itself, would be roughly $10 million, which is money. But in the grand scheme of protecting democracy here in Massachusetts, I think that's something that we can afford.
When the new Congress and the new Senate is sworn in next year, one way or the other, we're going to be facing a huge haul of an economic recovery in our state and everywhere else. What makes you better qualified than Ed Markey to help this state in that recovery next year?
I got in this race, John, because I believe that our country needs stronger leadership. And we need stronger leadership at every level, and we need it particularly in the United States Senate. I say this comes down to a couple of different points here. One, I don't believe when you look at the communities that have been most affected by this virus, communities like Chelsea, like Lawrence, like Brockton, like Revere, that Senator Markey's leadership has not been present or effective at trying to lift these communities up, hear those voices, and actually fight for them, as I have. Two, when you look at the times of crisis, and no doubt we are in, you look at the way in which we've had leadership in those moments. Senator Markey, after the Iraq War, or excuse me, after 9/11, he voted for the Iraq War, he voted for the Patriot Act. In the midst of a drug epidemic in the 1990s, he voted for the crime bill that locked up a generation of African-American men. The opportunities and requirements that we have in this state to lead us out of this, to get to a place where every single person gets access to the health care that they need when they need it, to make sure you've got an economy that actually includes everybody and fights for everybody, to make sure you have real, deliberate action on climate change. When we had unified control in Congress, when Democrats did, Senator Markey's bill couldn't even get past a Democratic-controlled House, Senate, and presidency. This is a real difference between us. And look, you look at how the difference between the two of us over the course of the past month. I was the first candidate in the state to shut down our campaign operations. We turned our fundraising list over and raised over almost $100,000 for local organizations on the front lines like the Chelsea Collaborative and the United Way. Our field team has been making well-being calls to seniors across the state, not campaigning for me, but checking in on them. This is the type of leadership I think this state needs, this state deserves, and our country is going to require to get us out of the mess that we are in for a generation going forward.
Well, I asked him the same question last week, and he cited his experience. He has a lot more Washington experience than you. Do you discount that?
I think there's more to leadership than experience. It comes down to also judgment and vision. And I think if we understand and you look at the senator's judgment from the vote for the Iraq War, the vote for the Patriot Act, for the vote for a crime bill, for voting present in Syria, for voting present even when Mitch McConnell called up the Green New Deal. I don't think leadership is voting present.
Congressman, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Stay well.
Thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget, August is going to be a big month politically. The Democratic and Republican conventions in whatever form they take. And on Tuesday, August 11th, WBZ will play host to a debate between Congressman Kennedy and Senator Ed Markey. That's all for me. Now it's back over to my colleagues for more WBZ News.